The NFL has come down excessively harsh on safety Derwin James, suspending him 1 game for his hit on Sunday, and unfortunately, the most special version of James is always going to come with these risks.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 9 seasons, and this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, the NFL is trying to make an example of Derwin James after his penalty on Sunday, and I think it's too much too soon, and I just hope that it does not make Derwin James gun-shy. And we got several injury updates. Justin Herbert x-rays, negative, thank God. But unfortunately, his 2 tackles are going to miss some time. And is the Ben Herbert signing a failure?
Man, I think it's a question a lot of people are asking on this Buy or Sell Tuesday, and right now it is harder to say that the Chargers are harder to break. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. David, I thought there would be a fine. I thought Derwin James would definitely potentially get fined because of his track record after the hit that he had on Pat Freiermuth on Sunday, and it was undoubtedly a helmet-to-helmet hit, right? What I would argue back against is the fact that I don't think it was a defenseless receiver who had taken multiple steps after he had made the catch and was prepared for Derwin James to hit him. I also think that it was not in any way a dirty hit and was absolutely a football play. And so for him to have his first offense of this season, I thought it was very excessive for them to go straight to putting him under an intense microscope and suspending him the first possible chance that they could get. I understand player safety. I understand trying to eliminate helmet-to-helmet hits. I think a suspension for the first offense this season, even with his track record, was too far by the NFL.
It's way too much. It's way too much too soon. I mean, what, like a hefty fine? Yeah, I get it. I understand. You want to try to keep the games as safe as possible, but understand this is a violent game. Like, these things are going to happen. Like, and like you said, I don't think this is like targeting or anything like that. Derwin James was not intentionally trying to hit somebody who could not defend himself. Pat Freiermuth knew that Derwin James was coming at him. He attempted to stiff arm Derwin James when he was coming at him. So it's not a defenseless receiver. Was it a helmet-to-helmet hit? Yes. Do you want Derwin James to wrap up? Yes, you do. But I just think a suspension after this so early on in the season is way too excessive, and I think this is just the NFL trying to make an example out of a superstar player, and I just hope it doesn't change the way he plays the game.
And it just really sucks because it does feel like Derwin James is a throwback type of player. It feels like I said, on Sunday, that Derwin James was meant for those kind of matchups. And if you look in that game, and if you look at every carry that happened in that game, you're going to see way more players against non-defenseless receivers making helmet-to-helmet contact when they go to tackle someone.
Yeah.
It happened 20 times in that game. It's far from the most egregious hit that we saw over the weekend. If anyone watched the Eagles game and saw a player that was getting held up by multiple defenders that another player targeted and hit in the helmet. Got crushed, right? So I get it. Do it uniform throughout the league and call it like that everywhere. That's not what's happening. This is someone getting singled out. This is someone getting punished for the NFL to show, hey, we care about player safety. We really care about it. This is the guy that you have to worry about it, and ignoring all of the other offenses that are going on throughout the league and the countless number of flags that you could throw in every single game. I understand it. According to the AP, he has the most unnecessary roughness since the start of 2023. In 2022, we also had the game where he got ejected for a play of hitting a defenseless receiver. This was not a defenseless receiver. This was a football play that happened, and he happened to catch his helmet, like, somewhat, right? It wasn't just a blatant helmet-to-helmet like that. There was helmet contact for sure. I did not think this was a dirty point in any way, and I definitely thought it was overkill for sure for the NFL to suspend him for the play in question. I just think it is. This is what they said. The video of the play shows that you lowered your head and made forcible contact to Steelers tight end Pat Freiermuth. You had an unobstructed path to your opponent, and the illegal contact could have been avoided. Your continued disregard for NFL playing rules will not be tolerated. Substantial penalties are warranted when players violate the rules intended to protect player safety on a repeated basis, particularly the violations that carry with them a significant risk of injury to an opposing player. He is a repeat offender. I understand that, right? But to suspend him for this specific hit, it just feels like they were just waiting for any moment they could possibly take to send this suspension to him and to send a message that's not really going to change the way any other player does it. It's just so that they can say, hey, look, we're trying to help. We're trying to be more safe. And that's just, to me, what it is at the end of the day. And it makes me sick. It does bring up an interesting buy or sell, though, David, because this is the first thing I thought of when we saw this news. Buy or sell, the best version of Derwin James is always going to come with these risks.
Yeah, I'm going to buy it. I mean, that's just the way that Derwin James plays the game. And that's the way that he knows how. That's the way he's always played it. Fast, physical, and free. You do not want a Derwin James that's gun shy, that's trying to think before he goes out there and plays, or he's thinking while he's playing, because that's what leads to mistakes. That's what leads to missed tackles. And, you know, if he's like, oh, how do I approach this? I don't know how to do this safely. Like that's just going to cause a level of play that we are not familiar with Derwin James. When he's at his best, when he's in that all pro form, he's flying around, making physical stops and making his presence felt. And I just don't want this situation to change the way he plays the game, because that's where Derwin James is at his best.
And it sucks, you know, because it does hurt the team. I think it does potentially hurt him in the game in 2022 against the Colts. He concussed himself trying to make a big hit like that. But this is a guy that also, according to Daniel Popper, spent the offseason trying to correct his tackling form, trying to figure out what the refs were calling, how they were calling it with George Stewart, their former coach that now works in the NFL offices. He's trying to get better at it, but he plays a fast physical game. He plays a fun game. He's good for the NFL. He's an exciting player in a league loaded with defense. He's maybe the most fun safety to watch in the entire league. And it feels like they're trying to take that out of him, because to me, a timid, apprehensive Derwin James is not a special player. We've seen it. It happened already when he was trying to stay away from the penalties a couple of years ago, and over the last couple of years, we've seen it. He has to play at 100%. He has to be on turbo at all times every game, or else he's just not the same kind of player. And I do think he has to be like this for him to be the best version of himself, because this was easily his best game of the season before it happened.
He was incredible.
Easily. Face mask, that hurts you. You can't have that. This play that he's getting suspended for, that's just one of like 5 huge hits that Derwin James had in this game. Well, he wasn't headhunting all game. Every one of his other big hits that he had was a perfectly legal hit. And they found the one that they could make the argument for to send the message. And that's what makes me sick, because they're going to take a special kind of player out of the league, and a player that's not out there intentionally trying to hurt people. He has to be better. He's trying to be better, right? But it's just, I don't know if I can see him evolving and still being the same caliber of player that's making top safety in the money league if he has to play under these conditions that are strictly and specifically only for him. There was only one player that was going to get that whistle and that suspension in that game, and it was Derwin James, and we saw it. It's not for everyone. They're specifically trying to target him, and the problem is these suspensions are probably going to get worse, right? Yeah. Like that's like, the next one could be a 2-game suspension. The next one could be a 4-game suspension. And he knows he's not trying to hurt his team or any other player. It's just tough, man. And this is going to be really interesting to see how it goes going forward. But they're taking one of their best players and one of the funnest styles of play out of the league when they do something like this, and it makes me sick. Let's get to Sam's Bowl here real quick, who has a buy or sell for us, David, who says if Asante Samuel Jr. doesn't fix his missed tackles, he's not getting re-signed. I'm short on time here, but I think it's simple, and I think it's a simple answer.
Yep, it's an easy buy. He has 4 missed tackles so far, 28.6 missed tackle percentage rate, which is 11% higher than his career average. You can handle that when you have the interceptions. We haven't seen the interceptions, so you can't handle it. If that doesn't change, he's not getting re-signed.
Yeah, and I mean, I always wondered how much of a fit he was for Jesse Minder's defense, a defense that asked their corners to be able to make the plays like he didn't make on Sunday. And 2 of the big plays he's allowed because of the missed tackles have led to 2 of the only 3 touchdowns the Chargers have allowed this season, right? He already has 4 missed tackles this year. He had 14 last year. 4 missed tackles in 3 games isn't going to cut it. It's his biggest flaw, and he doesn't have the takeovers and the plus side and the high ceiling to make up for his inefficiencies and what he isn't able to do, at least to this point. So you can hope it gets better. That's not been who he has been, at least to this point in his NFL career. But we still have more to get into, including why the Chargers should not play Justin Herbert this week in Kansas City, especially because we have great news on the tackles, but it still looks like both of them are going to miss this upcoming division rivalry game. So we're going to get into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about LinkedIn Jobs, though, because when you're hiring for your small business and you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role in a given month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And my wife was a recruiter, and the number one thing she always told me about LinkedIn and why she always made sure her company used it was the quality of candidates, because you do not want to have to fill that job that you just filled only a couple of months later because you don't have the right fit. Get the right fit with LinkedIn. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for their hiring. All you have to do, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. David, it is a big buy or sell Tuesday, and I think the thing on everyone's mind right now with this star quarterback is if he's going to play this week and what the severity of his injury is. The only thing we know up to this point, as far as an update goes, is that he had the x-rays on his ankle, and the x-rays were negative, which in the weird world of medical science is a positive, that it is a negative test there. So good to know. Hard to know, though, at the same time, how much more aggravated, how much worse he potentially made it by playing in that game, because obviously we saw him finish the game before dealing with the same injury, and he finished the game. There was no way he was finishing the game in the shape that he was in by the end of the game against the Steelers, or at least when he got pulled out. We talked about them potentially, whether or not they should have had him in that game to begin with. I understood it for sure, but now the question becomes this: buy or sell, David? Justin Herbert should sit this next game against the Chiefs.
Yeah, this is an easy buy for me. I just think, when you're going into this game, he has a high ankle sprain. That's something that, like most human beings can't walk alone, but, without crutches with a high ankle sprain. Obviously, Justin Herbert is a freak of nature, and he is completely built different than the rest of us. Yeah. That's why, he's a superstar quarterback in the National Football League. But going into this week, already re-aggravating the injury, and we don't know what the extent of that is. Going into a bye week, after this game, where you have an opportunity to give him that extra week and a half of rest at most, I think is just too important for them to do, especially when you're going into this game with injuries to both of your starting tackles. I just think it's borderline negligence if they do put him out there, if they do let him play in this game without the 100% strength of the offensive line. I just think it's not something that they should do. They should sit him, give him the most time to recover so that we can have the most wins possible this season, because without Justin, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a good argument to be made that he shouldn't have played last week. At the same time, I understand why they played him. That is a very important game, and they felt like he was good enough to protect himself. And now that and can see it in hindsight, he shouldn't have played, right? You lost the game anyways, even though you played him, and now potentially might have to keep him out longer. Whereas before that, you could have potentially gotten him an unprecedented 4 weeks of rest while only having to miss 2 games. Now you're up against a situation where if you sit him this week, you'll be able to have 3 weeks for him between games. The only reason I didn't preface this by saying if he's much healthier this week is it's almost impossible for me to believe he's going to be in better shape going into the Chiefs game than he was going into this past game.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening at all. And if it's that, there's no way I'm putting him out there as a sitting duck in that game against that defense, against the best defensive tackle in the league, against an offensive line on the interior that really struggles, and a team that's probably going to be missing their 2 premier tackles.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. I'm not putting him out there as a sitting duck to potentially have it get worse. He was a sitting duck at the end of that game. As soon as Rashawn Slater wasn't out there anymore, it was unsafe for him to be there, and it unraveled, and he got hurt because of the sacks. It wasn't like it was just a buildup of everything throughout the game. he looked noticeably different. His limp was insane. He could barely make it off the field by the end of it. So
yeah,
this is an important game. This is a huge game as far as ramifications go for your season. But the problem is if you make it worse in this game and he has to miss 3 or 4 games after that, then it totally defeats the purpose of even having him out there to begin with, right? Like if you're trying to win games, get him as healthy as you possibly can right now, because without him, you don't stand a chance. He should not be playing in this game this weekend against the Chiefs. It doesn't feel like they're ruling him out yet. But man, with the other injury news we're about to talk about, I can't see it. It feels like, you have to take the decision out of his hands, obviously. They said they did last week too, but like, you still let him play, right? So you obviously didn't fully take it out.
Yeah.
They have to take it out. Somebody has to make the decision this week that he's not playing, and he's not going to play until, at the soonest, the game against the Broncos in week 6. We do have good news on the injury updates, though. I mean, Justin Herbert having those negative x-rays is definitely good news, but there's good news on Rashawn Slater as well, because per Ian Rappaport, he has a pec strain and is also likely to miss the next game and potentially more. So obviously that doesn't sound like great news, but when you think about what the alternative is, it is very good news. And we saw in 2022, he tore his bicep, didn't strain his bicep, and he had to miss the entire season. The biggest fear here, David, was that he had a torn pec, and that is not the case, which is great news.
Thank the Lord, because you got a torn pec. That's it. That's all she wrote for the season. So thankfully that is not the case. But yeah, he needs his rest. It was clear. He tried to go back in the game. He got beat badly, very uncharacteristically, which, it's just not, we don't see a healthy Rashawn Slater lose reps like that ever. So, it's a good thing that it's not a season long thing. Hopefully, he's able to get back at as soon as he possibly can. But yeah, good news for Rashawn Slater, because and it kind of sucks, man, because my goodness, was he playing at a very, very high level. Like he was tearing it up as a pass protector and as a run blocker. Like he was doing everything at an extremely high all-pro level.
He is. He's an all-pro player. He's one of the best left tackles in the league, period. That's it. When he's healthy, he is that guy. And we saw it this year against Max Crosby. We've seen it in the past against every great pass rusher in this league for the most part. That is just who he is. He's great. This is terrible for the offensive line, right? I mean, it's good that it's not worse, but let's be honest. He is the anchor of this offensive line in pass protection and as far as run blocking goes. He is the constant. He is a guy that you can plan your game plan around running behind. The Chargers don't have that with him not out there. So to be heading into this game that he's likely going to miss against the Kansas City Chiefs, and a game which very obviously would have the game plan of let's run the ball down their throat and limit, control the clock, shrink this game as much as we can. You're not going to have this guy out there, and it's hard to imagine you could pull that game plan off without him. But last week was a disaster. But, it could have been a lot worse, at least as far as this Rashawn Slater injury goes. But at least this week, hopefully, with offensive line shifting around, they'll have a week to kind of prepare for who's going to be playing where, because that is something that has to get figured out, because it was an absolute mess once they lost their tackle last week. But Joe Alt also got hurt in the last play of this game, unfortunately. Crazy that we're having these conversations. Crazy how important of a player that Joe Alt already is for this team. And according to Ian Rappaport, he suffered an MCL sprain, which means he's likely to miss the next game and potentially more. Part of what we're saying about Justin Herbert is because Ian Rappaport is telling us that they're both likely to be missing the next game. Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. If those two guys aren't out there, I do not want a banged up Justin Herbert out there. But David, it is good news that it is not something worse for this rookie, because he is already such an important part of this team.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable how good Joe Alt has shown himself to be through the first couple of weeks of this season. And the last thing you wanted was for him to suffer an injury. But injuries happen in this game of football. Unfortunately, it is a major part of it. It's just how you are able to deal with those injuries and how you're able to make those adjustments. The Chargers are going to have to figure that out, and they're going to have to figure it out quickly.
Yeah, because just like with Rashawn Slater, your offensive line is considerably worse without him, right?
Period.
Like Trey Pipkins can be a serviceable right tackle. We've seen him do that. We've seen him even be better than that. But the problem is it's hard to trust Jamari Sawyer taking his spot at right guard, because he didn't have a good year last year and, hasn't really been that guy since playing left tackle as a rookie. And then you also have another whole tackle spot to figure out. Who's that going to be? Foster Sarell? There's just no way to feel good about that, because there's a lot of places the Chargers got much better depth. I think you can even say the offensive line had better depth than it has in years past. But there's just no way to replace two top 15 being conservative tackles in the league right now. There's just no way to do it. And the Chargers are going to have to, we're going to learn a lot about the other guys on this offensive line without Rashawn Slater and without Joe Alt this week, especially going up against, Steve Spagnuolo in this Kansas City Chiefs defense is going to test them, is going to bring the simulated pressures. We'll know pretty quickly, but anytime that you have something where you think it's going to be completely lopsided, that's usually when you can get surprised the most. And we might actually get surprised by some of these guys that fill in, and maybe they can surprise us in a good way, and we feel a little bit differently about the depth going forward. But right now, it's code red for this offensive line, missing their two premier tackles because the interior was already a huge question mark, and now you're losing the biggest strength and pretty much the only strength that you have on that offensive line right now. But we still have more buy or sells to get into, including buy or sell the Ben Herbert hiring being a failure so far. I think that's a thing on a lot of people's minds. We're going to talk about that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel because NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It's really awesome to be able to do. Whenever I can use FanDuel, I'm all about it. And right now, the odds are already out for the Chargers game against the Chiefs. They are opening as 8.5-point underdogs. Hard for me to pick, Taylor Heineke and company, especially knowing the guys that were missing. We talked about 3 in that segment. We know Derwin James isn't playing. Joey Bosa, very unlikely to play in this one. It's going to be hard for Taylor Heineke to cover that. But the good news is, there's still baseball you guys can be betting on all week. And they have a special page just for Shohei Ohtani where you can bet on all the great things Shohei Ohtani does. So for me, I'd be going on there and betting all the unders on everything Shohei Ohtani is going to do this week because he's playing against my red-hot San Diego Padres. And all you can do is go to FanDuel and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. All right, David, let's get more into this buy or sell Tuesday here with some more Chargers storylines and overreactions. And thank you to the everydayers, as always, for making us your first listen. If you guys need a second listen, make sure to check out the new lineup on Locked On NFL, where they have 2 shows every single day in the morning. You can get the madman, Tyler Rowland, who is absolutely going to wake you up, no coffee needed. And you also kick back in the barbershop with Tony Wiggins, who's just keeping it real all the time. And they're always bringing on the local experts who cover their teams every single day. So make sure you guys check that out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. Dave, let's get to this next buy or sell here because it is an overreaction, I believe, that I've seen all over social media so far in regards to Ben Herbert. And I mean, how could you not, right? I mean, this has already been kind of a disastrous season when you see this week and the amount of injuries that are piling up for the Chargers. So the buy or sell here today is this, David. The Ben Herbert experiment, I should say, has been a failure.
I'm going to sell it. Has there been some injuries? Yeah, just like every year for every single team. Every team is dealing with injuries. Has there been any season-ending injuries, knock on wood, at this point that has been reported? Through 3 games, the answer is no. So that is where I'm going to sit here and say I'm going to sell it. How could Ben Herbert get in the way of somebody falling on Justin Herbert's ankle? That's not Ben Herbert's fault. Like, that happens in the game of football. These things are going to happen. Only thing Ben Herbert can do is try to help put these guys in positions to put their bodies in through this stress, through all these different movements, and have them be able to withstand and outlast that. That's going to happen, hopefully, but in the NFL, these injuries are something you're always going to have to deal with, Ben Herbert or not.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe the hype train went too far on Ben Herbert, right? I'll sell it for now because I just think it's too soon to tell. I think it was also kind of irresponsible to ever think that they were all going to be solved because Ben Herbert was coming, right? I mean, we were definitely as optimistic as anyone that it could help their situation, which was losing star players for the season. And to your point, that hasn't happened with the Stars. The only guy I can think of that's missing the whole year that was projected to make the team is Chris Rumpf, who's on season-ending IR. You also have Nick Neiman and DJ Chark on short-term IR, but they're both supposed to return this season. But still, the Chargers don't feel like they're harder to break right now, right? It just doesn't. Obviously, when you see these injuries and the names that the injuries are happening to, because that's always going to make it feel much worse than it is, at least as far as numbers-wise, because it's not how many injuries you have, it's who is getting injured. And right now, it's Justin Herbert and Rashawn Slater and Joey Bosa and Joe Alt.
Yeah.
Part of the Chargers fixing their injury problem was always going to be partially about getting more durable players. That is part of the process. That's how you get to be a stronger, tougher team. at least in part, right? In trying to help the players that you do have. The problem is right now, it's the Chargers' absolute foundational players are the ones that keep getting hurt. You're not going to move on from Justin Herbert because he has a sprained ankle. The upside for Rashawn Slater is always going to be worth it, even when you consider the injuries that he's had up to this point in his career. So that part's always hard. This is my thing. We need a bigger sample size. And the other part of it is, it's like, maybe I sound crazy. Maybe I'm an idiot. I'm definitely not a doctor. But maybe without the training that Ben Herbert has had to this point, maybe it's a torn pec and not a strained pec, right? I don't know, but like maybe in some ways it is working. So I think we're going to have to see the whole thing as a whole. I think it's great that none of the stars have gotten put on season-ending injured reserve, but I think it's really hard for us right now to tell kind of what the impact that has had so far. Because Ben Herbert's big thing when he showed up is, hey, I was at Michigan all last year and there was only 2 players that had to miss the rest of their season because of injury. So that's definitely what he's going for. But I think you would hope, the Chargers at this point would be a little bit harder to break. But let's get to this next buy or sell here, David, because there's one thing that we really disliked at the beginning of the season that's sounding a lot better right about now. And the buy or sell is this. Buy or sell, the bye week for the Chargers is actually coming at the perfect time.
Well, we are all a victim of our individual circumstances, and for the Chargers right now, the bye week could not be at a better time.
Yeah.
When you have injuries to your quarterback, to your top 2 tackles, to your best edge rusher. This is the absolute perfect time to try to get all of those guys as healthy as they possibly can so that they can be ready for the rest of the season, because, hey, there's still, 13 games left, after the bye week. So that's where the big, real grueling stretch begins. And you want to have your top, highly paid, highly important players as ready to go for that stretch as they can be.
Yeah, it was definitely, I'm buying it. It was definitely thought to be a disadvantage at the start of the year. It felt like the same thing last year, and the Chargers got to week 5 and they were super banged up, and it felt like it was good then. It's always going to feel like a good time because of injuries, but the players the Chargers have right now, obviously they need to get back, and it's super important, or else they're just not going to have a chance to contend this year. This is my big thing. At least as of right now, it feels like there's a chance that all the Chargers stars could be back by week 6 for an important game in Denver. So in that way, I think the buy is at a perfect time. This is the other thing. This is a chance for a team with a brand new staff to figure out how to address their biggest issues and still be able to go out and play 13 more games after it. It's also another chance for Joe Ortiz to go try and find some improvements for this roster and get them up to speed. Yes. So I think it's crucial for this team to have this bye coming up so quickly, because there's a lot they have to get figured out, and it's a lot easier to make big adjustments, to bench players that might be struggling, to get new players on the team and really caught up to speed if you have a bye week, because the rest of the season is so game plan specific, it's really hard to work anyone else in. So I think it's huge for the Chargers that they have a bye week coming up. I don't think it could have worked out any better for them. But let's get to this last buy or sell here from Edgar S., who says, buy or sell, although the Chargers lost yesterday, there was no sign of charging. Chargers fought until the injuries to key players were too much to overcome. David, I'm buying this one big time.
I am as well. Too many times in the past, the Chargers have snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory, and made just some fantastical mistakes. The Chargers were winning this game. Okay, they were winning this game with a less than 100% Justin Herbert as we were going into halftime. Then Rashawn Slater got hurt. Then Justin Herbert went down, and then everything changed after that. So at this point in time, I think the Chargers are much more disciplined. They have an identity, and I think that's thanks in large part to Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz. I have not seen the charging up to this point this season.
Yeah, I think the only thing kind of, typical Chargers about this game is just the injuries. But that's never really been what charging has been about, right? Like, charging isn't about getting injured. Every team gets injured. Charging is about blowing a huge fourth quarter lead, right? The last time the Chargers played the Steelers before Sunday, they needed a historic performance from Justin Herbert, because you want to know how many points they gave up in that fourth quarter? 27. They gave up 27 fourth quarter points the last time the Chargers played the Steelers, and it took Justin Herbert going for just about 500 total yards to fend them off and keep the team from charging. Charging is missing a game-tying or game-winning field goal at the end of regulation. Charging is playing down to the level of your competition. What we've seen from Jim Harbaugh's Chargers has not been charging by any means. They've been a tougher team. They've been a more physical team. They haven't played down to the level of their competition. They went and stomped on the Panthers like they absolutely should have. They took care of business against the Raiders like they should have. They lost a hard-fought physical battle that they didn't blow a fourth quarter lead. They blew a 3-point halftime lead because their quarterback got hurt and their defense got worn down because their offense without him couldn't do anything. Simple as that. It's not charging. Will we see those moments? That's yet to be shown, right? We don't know that yet. But there's nothing about this team that feels similar outside of the injuries to the charging, to the 27-0 blown playoff lead, and the things that we've been so hateful of, in years past, and so afraid of. Like, I don't get to the fourth quarter, at least this year, afraid of the same things, right? They got to the fourth quarter against the Panthers and the Raiders, and they extended upon their leagues, and they put those teams away. They lost to a good team with a great coach. And sometimes it's just as simple as that. And they got hurt in the game. So I don't think they charged that game away by any means. And I still am hopeful that that is something that will die under Jim Harbaugh's leadership. And I think they're at least going in a great direction as far as that is, as far as we're thinking about that right now. I don't see this team charging like I've seen from teams past. But the season is still young and there's lots of time. And that is, those scars are going to be harder and harder to kind of wipe away. Those aren't things that Chargers fans forget. And we're still kind of trying to come to terms with having a real coach that could potentially put to bed all of those bad memories. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. One thing we didn't get to today that I'm sure we'll get to tomorrow is the Chargers signing wide receiver Jalen Reagor to their practice squad with the potential of him getting elevated to the active roster. So we will be getting into a mailbag tomorrow too. Make sure you hit us up at Locked On LAC or call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 and leave a 30-second Chargers question in your name there. You can also find the show every day on all of our social media and ask us a question anywhere. You can hit us up on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page, as well as hitting up David's DMs on Twitter at DroTalkSD and hitting me up at Dan Talk Sports. But to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from so you guys never miss the show. But that's going to do it for today's show. It's not all doom and gloom. A lot of positivity still on this horizon. We'll be here with you the entire way because it is your team every day. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow with a mailbag and to talk about this new addition, Jalen Reagor. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.